Yay, it's good to be back. Welcome back to the Jessica Ash Wellness YouTube channel. In today's episode, we're going to be covering 5 wellness trends to have on your radar in 2025. What's trending, what's worth paying attention to, what's a fad, what's something that's going to lead you astray, just talking about all that good stuff. If you're new here, I'm Jessica Ash, functional nutritionist and integrative health coach. And in this podcast, you can expect both a scientific and a spiritual approach to look at the story that's written into the female body, the female biology. What does it say? What does it tell us about our unique nutritional and metabolic and hormonal, mental, and spiritual needs as women? Just as a reminder before we get started, everything in this podcast is for education and inspiration only and is not intended as medical advice. Please talk to the appropriate professional if necessary, and please use common sense before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle. It's so good to be back in the new year. Happy belated new year. In today's episode, we're going to be going over 5 wellness practices to have on your radar in 2025. I'm just going to kind of go over like what's trending, what I've noticed is trending in the wellness space, what's worth paying attention to, what's the nuance in some of these things, what's a fad, what's worth ignoring, what's going to lead you down the wrong path, all of that. I just thought that would be kind of fun because even though the New Year's resolution hoopla has kind of passed, I feel like we're still going to be bombarded all year long. And let's face it, we're going to be scrolling. We're all going to be scrolling. And so let's be prepared with wisdom. Let's actually take this information and know how to apply it to our female biology and look at it through the perspective of understanding and our physiology, right? Because let's face it, there's some crazy things that people will do in the name of health. And the only reason I know this is because I have done crazy things in the name of health. I want to know, what's the worst thing you've ever eaten in the name of health or done in the name of health? I've done some really crazy stuff. I think one of the worst, like drinking Epsom salts for a liver gallbladder flush, was pretty nasty. I also used to make this ice cream that I was so undernourished and sugar starved that I thought it was actually good. Like my perception was that it was good, but it was this ice cream that I made out of riced cauliflower, stevia, almond milk, and protein powder. And I look back and I just like shiver thinking about eating that now. It was so disgusting. I think I actually added xanthan gum to like make it creamy and thick, which is even grosser. I've also I've also eaten fermented meat, fermented liver. It's kind of popular in the underground raw primal space. It's called high meat because it's supposed to make you feel high when you eat it. Oh my gosh, it's putrefying meat. That's literally what it is. And people say it's like good for probiotics and all this stuff. I can't even believe it. You know, I feel like I was a different person then, not leading with wisdom, just leading with extremism. And we're not doing that anymore. We've talked about the pendulum of extremes on this podcast so many times, and it seems like you ladies are starting to grasp that idea and starting to observe it all around you, how people just swing from one side of the pendulum to the other, right? And we do it as a society, a collective. And if you can't practice what's called the law of neutralization, which is like rise above, stop getting so caught up in your emotions, stop getting so caught up in your feels, and rise above, and let's actually look at things with rationality and logic, and let's talk about the nuance a little bit. Let's stop being so black and white about everything, than just kind of like be fear-mongered into doing things that don't actually work for our body. But to really do this, it does require a certain level of self-awareness, right? We have to get real about our behaviors and our drivers and our motivations, because I think a lot of people are not willing to admit to themselves what's driving them and what's motivating them. And this can really lead us astray, right? Because then we're making decisions out of just being emotional versus, okay, what are the outcomes that I'm looking for? What do I want this to look like long term? And how am I going to get there? Because I need to enjoy the journey too. I can't just like, grin and bear it and like clench my teeth and just like, buckle down and get through it to reach this end goal, because like that's my life we're talking about. That's life we're talking about. Like life needs to be lived, right? And so I think so many of us don't remember that, and we get caught up, and I'm just hoping that today's podcast will remind you to not get caught up. So I've noticed how as TikTok and social media has evolved, obviously we all are noticing the amount of information out there that's conflicting. There's so much conflicting information, and you can scroll and see an extreme vegan, and then the next scroll is going to be a carnivore, right? And you have this landscape of so many extremes and so much conflicting information, and it can be enough to drive anyone crazy, right? But I have noticed there's a few trends that I notice kind of standing out to me that I feel like there's a pattern. And so I'm going to go over these 5 trends that I feel are worth paying attention to, but also let's be cautious and not just dive in head first. And then I'm going to add a bonus one that I want to make a thing, like what does Gretchen say in Mean Girls? Like, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen. Well, this is going to be my fetch that I want to happen. None of these are going to be specific to 2025. They've already been going on, but I think more and more people are going to kind of implement them, and they're going to become the fads of the year. The first one is morning sunlight, right? This is not new, but it's been around for a long time. I've been practicing getting morning sunlight in my eyes probably for 8 years now. It's been a long time, but I feel like it's finally starting to approached the mainstream wellness consciousness of like, it's very important to get sunlight in the morning. But I want you to know why that is. I don't want you to just be like, I need to get morning sunlight and be militant about it. And if I don't, like, I'm going to become insulin resistant and leptin resistant and all this stuff. My circadian rhythm, it's not something that we have to be militant about, but I think we can all admit that there's kind of an epidemic of metabolic disease going on right now. People are insulin resistant, but the thing that actually happens before you become insulin resistant is leptin resistance and irregularities in the circadian rhythm. And this can happen for many different reasons. There's not just one primary reason, but light is one of the big ones. And as our society has spent more and more time under artificial lighting and in front of artificial lighting and being on our phones and computers, it's kind of gone beyond working on a computer all day to now we work on a computer all day and then we go home and we're on screens. It's kind of one of those things where we're just being exposed to so much unnatural light that I think we forget that we were supposed to be exposed to natural light all of the time. And unnatural light is now kind of taking the place. Artificial light is taking the place of that. And light is universal information. Light is the information of the universe, right? And then we also see this reflected in a lot of different religions, both present and past, ancient, where light is this very important thing. And this is because when you look at quantum physics, you see how as energy moves across the quantum fields, right? So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? We see the earth was formless and void. So we see these quantum fields, these things that are ripe, ready to take in this energy and to make something. And then God speaks, right? And this is not just in Christianity. This is many religions across the world will say that the universe began with a spoken word, right? Universe literally means one song. And because as this energy moves through these quantum fields that are ripe with potential for life, vibration occurs. And what comes from vibration? When something starts to vibrate, what comes off of it? Waves, right? And so in quantum physics, there's something called wave-particle duality, where the waves that come off of vibrations are both waves and particles. And light is electromagnetic radiation, right? Most people are familiar with the term of electromagnetic fields. Electromagnetic waves give off radiation, and that is what light is. And so not all light is perceivable by the human eye, but it is always information, and your body is always taking in that information and determining what is going on in its environment. Remember that Isaac Newton figured out that light, although it appeared colorless, it actually had many different spectrums of color, and you could split light, right? Like we know when we take like some type of prism, it splits the light into green and blue and red and purple, right? Light has color, and then when you put all those back together, the light appears white or clear again, right? And these different spectrums of light give us different information. And so the infrared light that's available specifically at sunrise and at certain parts of the morning, and then of course at sunset, give our body some very specific information about what to do in its environment. And that includes wakefulness and sleep, digestion. All of our body's processes do like to follow a light rhythm. And so it is a good practice, especially if you're trying to optimize your metabolism and you're trying to reset your circadian rhythm and get yourself feeling better overall. It can feel really hard to get up at sunrise or to get up in the morning and get some light in your eyes. But even if you can just do it for 3 to 5 minutes and start small and just do that and go back to bed for a little while, you don't have to do it perfectly, or just whenever you wake up, get some light in your eyes right away. Even if it's just for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, it can make a huge difference in just your overall well-being. Second fad that I don't see going anywhere soon is protein. Everybody's obsession with protein. Now, here's the deal. Not all protein is created equal. Can we just agree on that? All these people that are using these like protein powders and protein drinks that are super processed and have disgusting ingredients and are almost kind of like non-foods, that is not the same as like an egg or a steak or ground beef or shrimp or a piece of fish. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad, but remember, the bioavailability of your protein is just as important, and also the nutrients that are paired in your protein are important, because the whole point for sustainability is to be satisfied and to be satiated. And so if you're getting that protein from nutrient-dense sources, you're going to just feel better. You're gonna have less cravings. You're gonna feel much more satiated, much more nourished. But I feel like a lot of women right now are having a hard time getting enough protein without blowing out their calories from fat, because a lot of nutrient-dense protein sources are pretty rich in fat, which is not a bad thing. You need fat, you need cholesterol to feel satiated, to get bile flow going, to make hormones, but fat is very rich in calories. And so it's easy to overdo it and not realize how much you're overeating. But what's very popular in the macro counting space is to opt for lots of like protein powders and ultra processed high protein foods. So I always encourage you, instead of relying on lots of ultra processed protein supplements to add protein without adding too many calories, just focus on adding in things like egg whites and chicken breast, and you can grind chicken breast into patties and make meatballs or patties and add that to your meals. If you're not trying to get too much extra fat and you're having a hard time getting enough protein, remember, a whole foods option is always better and often cheaper, to be honest, and you can boost up your protein that way. So for example, if you're having eggs in the morning but you're not trying to blow out your calories and have 7 eggs, you can do a couple of whole eggs and then some egg whites. Or if you're having a meal with beef and it's kind of a fattier beef, enjoy that fatty beef. Fatty beef is good. And then maybe add like a chicken thigh or a half of a chicken breast on the side, or have some pre-made ground chicken meatballs that you can just warm up, or things like shrimp are super low in fat. So it's not about getting no fat, but a lot of women, you find that when they're trying to up their protein and only get it from whole foods, often protein sources have a lot of fat. And if you're not trying to eat a high fat diet at this time, you're trying to be aware of where your calories are coming from and get enough protein, carbs, and fat, then having some protein sources that are just almost pure protein can be very helpful. And if you can do dairy, things like 0% or 2% Greek yogurt or lower fat cottage cheese, again, nothing wrong with the full fat, but if you think about it from an ancestral perspective, we wouldn't have been getting tons of dairy fat, because we would have been using that fat to make butter or cream or things like that. So it's kind of like you either have full fat milk or you make butter from that fat that is on your milk. You can't have both, where we kind of live in the land of plenty right now. So I think protein is a great thing. I think a lot of women are under eating protein, especially bioavailable protein that comes from animal foods, and like properly prepared things like beans are fine too. They're not going to have as high of bioavailability, but they're still good to implement and can be helpful to implement. That's a great practice, but don't get too caught up in the marketing of just because it has protein. You're going to start to see like, has this amount of protein on the labels. Labeling is going to try to go after this fad. Just because it has protein doesn't mean it's good for you, right? Don't get caught up in that rabbit hole. But protein is essential for you. It's really important for thyroid health. It's really important for liver health. And it's just going to help your body composition kind of naturally, because it does increase your metabolism, your metabolic rate overall. But don't get caught up. Just because it has protein doesn't mean it's automatically good. It is important to keep in mind that the carnivores will try to convince you that you are a carnivore and not an omnivore, and that protein is the best thing for you. But protein is a very dirty fuel source if you have to use it for fuel. Protein is often used for repair of tissues and building. It's like the Legos of the body, the building blocks of the body. That's what amino acids are for. And it can be used as fuel, but it's a very dirty burning source of fuel. So it's not ideal. Your body will use it if it needs to, but you really want to use carbs or fat as fuel. And this leads me to the third trend that I'm seeing, which I think the kids are calling it whole foods or animal based, which is really interesting to just see this kind of rebranded primal paleo, but it's its own version. It's pretty much just the pro-metabolic diet, but kind of paleofied or primalfied. It's its own framework that's like eggs, meat, high quality dairy, bone broth, and mostly fruit, no vegetables, no grains or beans, but you can have sourdough and honey and maple syrup. It's a very interesting mix of I feel like it's a trickle down of carnivore and pro-metabolic kind of meshed together. And I love to see people eating whole foods. I love to see people eating enough carbs. I love to see people eating enough protein. I love to see people eating really nutrient-dense fats. However, not everyone is going to do well on a framework like this. I think frameworks like this can be really helpful to get us started on something. But some people are really not going to do well eating fruits in the wintertime, right? Because that's not really a seasonal thing. Some people are going to really need to implement more vegetables in their diet to promote bile flow and to have the soluble fiber to bind to those bile acids and carry them out of the body. Some people are going to need that prebiotic diversity. Some people do really well on grains like rice and oats and things like that. These frameworks can help. It's really good to stick to whole foods as much as possible, but you don't need to be militant about it. Also, sometimes that goes back to our last point. If you're doing tons of high-fat dairy and you're also doing tons of fruit, sometimes you can actually overeat. It's very easy to overeat because these are hyper-palatable foods. And so if you're not eating enough fiber from non-starchy vegetables, it can be easy to overeat. And young people are going to do really well on that because they still have really high-functioning metabolisms for the most part. But as you get a little bit older, you're going to find you have a little less flexibility for that, especially if you're not active. If you're active, you're weightlifting, you're strength training, you might not notice that. But if you aren't, you're going to maybe follow something like that and be like, why am I not losing weight, or why am I even gaining weight? And it's just because you're not as aware of where your macros are coming from. So you still need to be a little bit macro aware, even if you're following like a whole foods animal-based diet, unless you're super active and that doesn't really matter for you. And then switching gears a little bit, the fourth trend that I think we're going to see pop up a little bit more is people are going to talk more and more about spring water. You're kind of seeing underground rumblings of people starting to switch over from drinking their hyper-filtered reverse osmosis waters to drinking spring water and seeing a lot of benefit from it. And this makes sense, right? Because when you look at water, I learned a lot about water from her Instagram is Carrie B Wellness, but she has this whole water training that's really interesting about exclusion zone water and the structuring of water. You can also check out Vita Austin. She does all these experiments on water. But spring water, there's more to water than just like what's in it and what's not, right? And I think we're starting to realize that as human beings, maybe slowly, is that water has its own structure. It's very responsive. It's intelligent. There's an intelligence to water. And if that sounds crazy to you, well, welcome to the universe, because water is so intelligent. It can actually pick up the frequencies of what's around it, and it structures itself accordingly. And spring water specifically is not only just full of minerals and nutrients from running over the rocks, primarily trace minerals, right? As it runs through these streams and these springs, it's picking up different minerals that are where whatever is in the land and the earth in that location, the water will pick that up. But also the water's being aerated, there's bicarbonates in it, so it's just it's a nutrient dense water, right? It's what we're supposed to be drinking. Everyone's supposed to be drinking spring water, and some places still do, right? Some places will pipe in spring water. Every municipal district is different, but for the most part we're being cut off from drinking spring water. So some people are just biting the bullet and drinking spring water, even if it comes from plastic bottles, and seeing a huge benefit from it. So I think we're going to see people talking more and more about that in the next year. Some things that people are going to report are better hydration, better digestion, just feeling more hydrated overall, and just better vitality and overall well-being because they're more hydrated. The fifth and final trend that I don't really see going anywhere is intermittent fasting, but specifically I'm seeing an uptick in excitement around cycle-based or menstrual cycle synced intermittent fasting. And I think this is based on the book by, what's her name? Dr. Mindy Peltz, I think that's the one, who wrote Fast Like a Girl. And so people are starting to kind of follow the patterns. I think in that book, I read it when it came out, but it's I'm trying to remember. It's timed for your menstrual cycle. So it's like you fast a certain amount of time during certain phases of your cycle. And if I'm recalling properly, I think she recommends the most fasting during menstruation, and then there's different hours ranges given up until the luteal phase, and then the luteal phase is recommended to not fast to support progesterone. I don't necessarily agree with the timing of that, just based on our energy input versus our energy output and how our energetic needs shift and our metabolic needs shift. I think there seems to be, because people are going by the mainstream advice that estrogen is dominant in the follicular phase and then progesterone is dominant in the luteal phase, and the mainstream advice of how progesterone affects metabolism versus estrogen, there's some kind of misunderstandings about the metabolic needs during the cycle because of this. And then of course this differs for women who are menopausal or perimenopausal. Now, if you followed me for any period of time, probably know my thoughts and opinions on fasting. And again, that's just my opinion. I think most women who are in a survival-based approach to eating don't need to necessarily add fasting on top of it. Do we need some parameters? Sure. Like, I think it's important to not just be eating and mindlessly snacking all day, but everybody is coming into eating with a different perspective. And so I think when you are sitting down to eat, it's really important to eat a full, nourishing meal that contains what you need, and to not be eating all day constantly if you don't need to. However, there's people that really do need some food frequency and to eat pretty frequently until they get themselves back into alignment. They've got to get their body out of that survival state. And so there are women that really benefit from eating a bedtime snack, right? That's not every woman, but some women do. And so there's just a lot of nuance with fasting, and fasting is more of a spiritual practice that has been kind of wellness-fied. And I think it's also important to be aware of what our lifestyle is. To just slap fasting on top of everything else we're doing, especially if we're living a stressful lifestyle, I don't think it's wise to fast in the morning. I think it's better to start your fast in the evening, and also be aware of how long are days at the time that you're fasting, right? You're going to fast differently in the winter versus the summer. So it's just one of those things that I think there's a lot more of the conversation, and I don't have enough time in this episode to dive into it, but I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think it is better to time your fasting and be aware of where you are in your cycle than to just grin and bear it and just do intermittent fasting every single day the same way every single day. Usually that doesn't get women anywhere, and in fact often gets them to a place, it's one road to binge town where they can't stop thinking about food, and eventually their hormones will start to scream at them. But I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's better to sync your intermittent fasting to your cycle than not pay attention to your cycle at all. But most women are going to do better with a little bit more of a mindful approach than just focus on fasting. To sum it up, it's not going to kill you to fast once in a while, but be mindful about it. Don't just mindlessly do things like that. And before I let you go, for my little bonus, the fetch that I'm trying to make happen is, can we stop demonizing vegetables and saying that all vegetables are frankenfoods and they're not meant to be eaten by humans? Like, what type of psyop is going on right now? I think it's important to be mindfully aware that vegetables are not nourishing in the way that animal foods are, right? I almost look at it as animal foods are nourishing, plant foods are more cleansing, right? But they do have benefit. There are so many things that vegetables can do for you, like stimulate bile flow and bind to bile acids and fat-soluble toxins. And maybe not all vegetables work for you. And we have a problem in this country, especially in the US, of forgetting how to properly prepare food, right? In the past, traditional cultures have always pickled vegetables and boiled vegetables and fermented vegetables and cooked them really well and stewed them, right? Very rarely were people just eating these massively big salads. Plants were treated with the respect that they deserved. And it's time we go back to that, right? Eat plants in an appropriate and biologically appropriate manner, but don't demonize them. And also, if you can't digest a piece of raw broccoli, that doesn't mean broccoli is indigestible to you. It just means that you were dumb enough to eat raw broccoli. For the love of God, it's meant to be cooked, man. So that sums up today's episode. I hope you had a little fun with me. I had fun. If you can't tell, I'm feeling really hopeful about this year. I see so many things that Gen Z is doing and the younger generations that I'm just like, yes, you guys are going to save the world. And we just have a lot of things on the horizon changing and what's going on a celestial level, shifting ages, and everything that's going on is just, there's something in the air, and I'm excited about it. But if you enjoyed today's episode, next week we're going to dive a little bit more into what biologically appropriate nutrition looks like, and I will see you in next week's episode. If you'd like to receive my weekly Sunday article, which I lovingly call Sunday Tea because it goes out early Sunday morning and I picture you reading it as you drink your tea or coffee, you can find the link to sign up for that in the show notes or go to jessicaashwellness.com/email-subscribe. Our new membership, Philosophia Society, just kicked off and it is such fun. It's a mesh of conspiracy theories discussing religion, wellness, and nutrition, just an open-minded group of women questioning everything and willing to dig. I do a monthly live Q&A in there. We have a monthly mystery study, which right now we're actually going through the Bible together. And I also come out with videos every month covering different things from nutrition, wellness, health, religion, philosophy, and conspiracy theories. You can request whatever you want, and I'll put it on the list. It's a lot of fun, and if that's not your thing, totally cool. Keep your eyes peeled because I have a few things coming out just for you right around the corner that are more biology, nutrition, and bioenergetics related. Stay tuned. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you soon.